You're listening to Beyond the Stage from the Carpenter Performing Arts Center at Cal State Long Beach. In each episode, we introduce you to the artists, scholars, students, and arts professionals interpreting our world through the arts. Join us this week and every week this summer as we explore their stories. Let's get started. Hello, hi. Good morning, everybody. I am here today with José Miguel Palacios. He is a film professor in the CSULB Department of Film and Electronic Arts, working in the areas of film history and transnational cinema. His teaching and research interests cover Latin American cinema, film and media theory, radical film cultures, documentary, film archives, and the relations between cinema and migration. Prior to joining CSULB, he was a postdoctoral fellow at the art department at Universidad Alberto Hurtado in Santiago, Chile, and taught a wide variety of film and media courses at New York University, as well as many other universities. Welcome, Professor Palacios. How are you this morning?
Thank you, Olivia. I'm very good. Happy to be talking to you.
Thank you. Welcome. So to get started, I'd like to give a visual description of both of us. So my name is Olivia. I am a white woman with blonde hair. I'm wearing a blue shirt and I have turquoise headphones on. You'd like to give a visual description for yourself?
Yes, my name is José Palacios and I am a man from Latin America. I have brown hair, even though I'm, getting older. So there's some grayness a lot coming up. And I'm wearing glasses. I have a beard. Yeah, that's about it, I would say.
So I wanted to get started by talking a little bit about your background and how you ended up working in film and ended up at CSULB. So to get started, what drew you into the film industry in the first place? And can you tell us a little bit about how you started working in film and eventually film criticism?
Yeah, well, I am from Chile and I spent there most of my life until I was about 25, 26 years old. I went to film school as an undergraduate student there. And it was mostly very much production-oriented film school. So, I did the usual thing, short films, different kinds of film and media projects. I was, at the time, I really thought my whole life would be, devoted to making films or different kinds of media. And then at some point, I realized that I didn't actually enjoy it that much. But what I didn't enjoy actually was the experience of being, on the set. It was terrible for me. It was very excruciating, and I always had a much more. I did some teaching assistance work during my undergraduate degree, and I really enjoyed that. I always thought that I would eventually like teaching. I didn't know exactly, in what kind of setting, but I was interested in teaching, and I was very much craving for a much deeper dive into the history and theory of film and moving images in general. So, which is something that, as I said, I kind of lacked in my original education. So I was doing that sort of on my own, reading books, watching a lot of films and things like that. And eventually, that all coincided with the opening of a new, fellowship program in Chile that I was able to participate in, and eventually, got that fellowship to come to the U.S. and pursue an MA in film studies. So I went to New York to Columbia University, and then I fell in love with with film studies as a discipline, with writing about films, and analyzing films, and doing research, right? And that's when I decided I would continue in that path, and I applied for PhD programs, and I went back to Chile for a short period of time, and then came back to the US for my PhD, and I stayed on for about 6 years. It was a great experience. I was very lucky to have excellent teachers and mentors. For me, people like Jane Gaines or Robert Stam, who are renowned world scholars and people who taught me a lot, and I learned from them, the rigor, but also the pleasure of working with film and working with students. And then I went back to Chile, and I took a postdoctoral position there, doing some research and teaching. And I always, in a way, when things that happen when you leave to a different, and you go to different countries, you sort of get, more familiarized with, institutional settings and academic contexts that are not necessarily your own, and they're very different from your own, and you become more comfortable in those. So when I was in Chile, I was always thinking, I don't feel completely, comfortable in my position here, and I would love to go back and teach at a university in the US, and that's eventually how I got back to now California. It's my first time living in the West Coast, and I'm really happy to be at CSULB and its film department.
Yeah, I think I love the part of your story where you talk about like you didn't enjoy being on set, and I think a lot of students might resonate with them, because sometimes they think, well, if I don't like doing this thing, like maybe I need to leave the field altogether, and that's not necessarily true. There's other paths like academia or teaching or other things. So I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah. I think there are lots. That's a great thing about cinema. There are lots of paths that are related to it, and it's it doesn't mean that we're not sort of like in that kind of world, but there are different approaches to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about what your focus is, because I want to talk a little bit about what your focus is, because I think that sometimes, I'm not from the film world or the cinema world, but I think there's a perception sometimes that like film criticism is just, or film critique is just one big area, but it's really like the way it's broken down into different focuses. And your focus is cinema of like migration, protest, and resistance. Is that correct?
Yes, that's one of the things that I'm very much interested in. Yes.
So I attended a talk recently that you gave called Cinema, Solidarity, and Resistance. And for those who may not know and are listening, can you talk a little bit about what resistance cinema or protest cinema is? And are there like examples in popular culture that you could point to as kind of like a starting place for us?
Yeah, of course. I think, just to give a very short detour, before answering your question, because I guess the title from that talk was responding to a very much specific thing, and I was using, I guess, resistance in a particular context, which was these films by Latin American film directors that in the 60s, 70s, and 80s had gone into exile, were refugees from the dictatorships that were sweeping the continent in those decades, right? And they were living in Europe or the United States or Canada and making different kinds of films that were engaging with their political situation in their home countries. So that's, a little bit of, where the concept comes from. And there's also a different kind of origin to resistance, historical origin, right, which is tied to, the Second World War, right? We talk about, resistance against fascism, resistance against, Nazi Germany, French resistance, Spanish resistance, and so forth. So I'm just saying that to indicate that there is, that's sort of like the historical origin of the idea of resistance, and that in terms of cinema, it is connected to that kind of political phenomena and social movements and so on. And in a general sense, we can say that it indicates, struggle, right? And, oppositional practices. So in a very, I guess, loose term, if I say, a cinema of resistance, we can mean, all kinds of films that are, in a way, conceived, right, or designed to, call out oppression, fight oppression, demand justice, right? Films that are examining a certain historical or political moment with, with a critical spirit, and films that are imagining, right, different alternative possibilities for our world, right, for the world that we share together. So when I say, cinema of resistance, and we can, use other terms like, you said, protest, rebellion, struggle, etc. But in general, that kind of oppositional filmmaking practice, and by that, definition, it really stands, again, opposed, or if not directly outside of, what we would consider, conventional mainstream industrial, filmmaking, Hollywood cinema, or any sort of conventional, cinema in the different countries of the world, right? So that would be one thing. But I think, we can also think of it in, even, loose, even, more flexible terms than that. And I think, throughout film history, there are many different examples of movements or films that have found creative ways of operating, sort of critiquing or against the very system of which they, in which they are a part of. So let's say, for instance, one of the very first things that comes to my mind is, a film a couple of years ago, like Parasite, the Bong Joon-ho film from South Korea, that, it really presents a hilarious critique of capitalism, of class relations, and it's tied to a particular context, right? In East Asia, but it resonates and has echoes that it can be felt in different corners of the world, right? And not only that, but it's a film that is able to not only sweep all the major awards, but in the process of doing that, sort of changing the discourse around, or forcing the industry to change discourses around, for instance, what a foreign language film is, right? And changing the language around that sort of designation. So in that sense, that's also a kind of political action, right? So, and it's not, those kinds of effects, are not necessarily inside the world of the world that is represented in the film, right? But is part of how, the film intervenes in certain spheres, right, of our life. So I think that's another interesting dimension too, right, in relation to that idea of resistance, right? It is how films, participate from our world and provoke certain actions and reactions in our world.
And that's interesting, like that they're able to make a change, or or almost a catalyst for some type of change, or a call to do something different or see a different world almost. I'm curious, what led you to this course of study? Is there something from your life that made you want to study this particular type of cinema? And what was that?
That's a good question, and I don't think there was something, personal in my life other than, I guess, a desire to, again, from the very specific thing that I was studying, in my master's PhD degrees that had to do, with these films from Made in Exile by Chilean and Latin American directors, it had to do with a desire to engage more closely with that political history, which was very troubling for the different nations in Latin America. And so I was coming out of that, I guess. But more broadly, I was always interested in those cinemas that were sort of pushing the boundaries of what film could be as an art form and also as a political form, because I am, I believe and I am convinced that all those kinds of artworks have important political effects and can shape, the way we can conceive of the world and the way we can imagine the world. So I don't believe there's a particular reason that explains my desire to explore those cinemas, but I was attracted to them and in all their forms, right? And you were asking me about examples before, and we can think of a lot of things like the women filmmakers who were working in Hollywood, in classical Hollywood, people like Dorothy Arshner or Ida Lupino, or the filmmakers of the LA Rebellion in Los Angeles, right? Even way back in time, people like Black filmmaker like Oscar Michaud, responding to a film like Birth of a Nation, right? With Within Our Gates. So those kinds of film practices that are, reacting against dominant modes of representation and that are also finding, again, creative ways, pushing the aesthetic language of cinema to, because it's not only about, the theme, right, or the stories that are conveyed in these films, but how to find a language that can also be quote unquote radical, right? How the very aesthetics of the cinematic form can be pushed in new directions to provoke certain effects on viewers. And that's also been a recurrent theme in film history, from, the Soviet filmmakers in the 1920s to, our contemporary world. So, I sort of deviated from your question, but I would say no particular explanation for my desire, but to engage with these films, but just I would say, an endless curiosity for the capacity of cinema, and I think that's something that's very important to me, and that I try to present to students in all the different kinds of classes that I teach, is those endless possibilities of the art form that go, way beyond what the feature-length fiction film is, and actually the feature-length fiction film is just a minor fraction of all the kinds of moving images that are produced and that have been produced in our daily life. So yeah.
So these Latin American and Chilean directors of the 60s and 70s, you said, right? They were exiled and went all over the world, Europe, Canada, US, and they were influenced, right, by kind of some of the film that was happening there. And it was really brave what they did, if I'm understanding correctly. I mean, they were making cinema that was a commentary on what was happening in their own countries, a form of protest. How did that, I guess, help shape kind of the discourse that was happening? What were some of the catalysts that came out of that? I'm thinking sometimes we think of protest art or resistance art, and what immediately sometimes comes to my mind is Banksy, how he'll put up a mural or a tag and it gets people talking about a certain social or political topic, or the statue of the little girl in front of the Wall Street Bull, another form of protest art. And cinema can do the same thing. I think often we, like you said, think of just Hollywood, but that's not always, that's just a portion of the type of cinema gets made. And this type of cinema that you're referencing is brave and radical and really pushing for social and political change. Am I understanding this correctly?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, I mean, your examples are right on point. And I think one thing that, you know, to bring this to the present, one thing that we can think about is how, of course, the notion of cinema is being expanded now in terms of these different kinds of moving, you know, work, moving image work that are being created for, let's say, political purposes, right? But I think, you know, one way of thinking about this is if we think of all, you know, the events, you know, events that have been shaping our world in the last, you know, couple of years. And here in the US, the Black Lives Matter movement and all the waves of protests, right, against, you know, violence against African American citizens, that has been tied to a form of, you know, visual documentation, right? It has been tied to series of, you know, they're not films, right, but they're works that have been made, you know, with cell phones that are meant to circulate on social media, that are shared and spread very rapidly, you know, throughout multiple kinds of online and virtual channels. And so that's something that's very important in terms of, you know, what is the role of the moving image in, you know, recording, preserving, but also you know, fostering a kind of, you know, accelerating, spreading that energy of social transformation. You know, we've seen that people have been highlighting the importance of the visual record in, you know, the trial against, you know, the policeman charged for the murder of George Floyd. So that's also very important. But the record itself, you know, is circulating in a way that is forming different collectivities, right, to unite together and to, you know, to think about what their role is as actors, as political actors, right? And I think so the work of film and moving images is really important in that regard. It is really important in creating an image of that sort of collective we that are standing in demand of justice. And we see it, you know, I was saying, you know, Black Lives Matter movement, but it has happened all over the world. It was very important, you know, about 10 years ago in the phenomena of the Arab Spring in 2020, 2011, the last couple of years in Hong Kong and Latin America as well, with a wave of different protests. So I think there's a power there in the way in which people record these events, but not only in the work itself, but how they circulate, right? How they create a different sphere for fighting the different kinds of oppression that different groups are resisting against, right?
Yeah. And another thing I hear you saying is that it's not just the theme, but the imagery itself, the repetition of that has like a certain power to it. I'm thinking, like, when I've seen videos of Hong Kong protests and then comparing them to videos I've seen of protests here in LA around Black Lives Matter, the imagery can be very similar. And that's like a powerful tool, right? To like convey a certain motion, feeling of resistance and protest. And that's kind of what you're speaking to, I think, right?
Absolutely, and I think there is an you know, either explicitly acknowledged or not, but there is a kind of pedagogy in that sense of the image that travels from these different places, and even, you know, protesters adopt certain strategies, right, from the youth in Hong Kong, or you know, the feminist collective movements in Latin America that stage you know, protests that are repeated throughout the world, and so forth. So I think that work of repetition is very crucial, and we need to, you know, to really study that. We need to follow how it travels, right, and how it circulates. And I do think, and I'm reminded here of the work of, you know, one of my former professors, Jane Gaines, who talked in the early 90s, and actually in relation to you know, the Rodney King videos and other kinds of visual documentation of the idea of what she called political mimesis, which was that sense of images that propelled viewers to act on what they were seeing, right? To sort of imitate that world of representation and take it on to, the actual real world itself, right? And that's also been it's a recurrent thing in the film history in different parts of the world. It was also very present in the cinemas of Latin America and Africa in the late 60s. How could films mobilize action, direct action? And it's in a way, it's a kind of utopia because, it really can't happen. It's not that a film is going to produce, social change by itself, right? But it can spread a kind of energy that is felt and shared by many different people.
It doesn't exist in the vacuum. It is a part of the greater discourse and movement and what's happening with whatever movement or protest or form of resistance that's happening. Yeah, absolutely. If someone listening was interested in learning more about this, where should they start? Because I will admit I didn't know anything about this topic until I attended your talk recently. And I've been incredibly interested since then in seeing more of these films and learning more about this. So where could someone start? Do you have a few film recommendations or director recommendations that they check out to further their own learning?
That's a great question, and some of I would say some of the, in a way, perhaps for those of us who are invested in film history, it might be a bit canonical films, but things like the Battle of Algiers, like Pontecorvo in the late 60s was very important as that kind of film that is not only representing, obviously, revolution and revolt in Algeria in this case, but again, sort of participating from that larger discourse of, in this case, the critique of colonialism and so on. So I think that film would be, and it's also very, I would say, entertaining, spectacular film to watch. Another thing that I can think of is perhaps a bit more radical filmmaker like Peter Watkins and his film La Commune, which is about the Paris 1871 revolutionary moment, and it's very distinctive for how it blends, I guess, the fiction with documentary, right? I'm thinking of those things come to my mind. Well, I would say in the U.S., of course, the work I mentioned before, the work of the filmmakers of the LA Rebellion, people like Charles Burnett or Haley DeRima, and then in the 1990s, obviously Julie Dash or Spike Lee. There are films that can be thought of within this sort of general loose understanding of resistance, right? Those would be a few things that I'm thinking of.
All right. We'll link to all those in the show notes, and I'm almost like maybe we need to do like a weekend film festival
Absolutely.
at the Carpenter Center or something.
Absolutely.
That would be very fun and I think educational as well. Well, Professor Palacios, thank you so much for being with us today. I just have a few fun questions I like to end on for every episode. So to get started with our rapid questions, do you have a favorite film of all time? And if so, what is it?
This question always puzzles me because I never, I honestly don't think I have one favorite film of all time. It probably changes. But I would say, I guess the first one that comes to mind now, and the film, I guess that I've seen many times, that I've taught at different times too, is, In the Mood for Love by Wong Kar-wai, film from 2000. Very exquisitely beautiful film.
Did you have a favorite film of 2020 or of the last year, I would say?
Yeah, same thing. When I'm asked these questions, usually my mind goes blank. But I would highlight, and I can't remember exactly when I saw it. it's probably a year and a half ago, a film called The Infiltrators by Alex Rivera and Cristina Ibarra. I do think it's a wonderful film that deserves more visibility, and that it's really in the vein of what we've been talking about, of finding creative ways of resisting, and in this case, tackling the question of immigration in this country.
That's an important topic right now. Yeah. And always, but especially right now. What are you looking forward to as we return to more in-person events? I think California has announced that we will be reopening sometime in June. So what are you most looking forward to as we return to less lockdown and more of what might be normal life?
Everything. I've been very responsible in this last year and a half. So I really haven't done anything. So I really look forward to, going back to a theater and watching a film in a room with different people. It's something I would like to do, and I would like to, I really look forward to being back in the classroom and meeting our students and even my colleagues. I haven't, I was telling you, I've been here just for a few months. I'm a new professor at the university, and I haven't met anyone in person, so I look forward to that too.
Absolutely. Well, it's going to be nice to have professors and students back on campus in the fall, getting to meet one another and just enjoy being in a classroom for sure. I totally understand that. Well, thank you so much for being with us today again, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Olivia. It's been a pleasure.
Beyond the Stage is produced by the Carpenter Performing Arts Center at Cal State Long Beach. Views expressed by guests of the show or the host are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of the university. A special thanks to today's guests and to the entire staff of the Carpenter Performing Arts Center, including our Executive Director, Megan Klein-Crockett. Audio engineering is provided by Ken Beaupre, graphic design by Patty Laurel, digital communications by Franz Newman, and additional marketing and media assistance by Amber Legaspi Valdez. Our theme music is by Ken Beaupre. If you'd like to support Beyond the Stage or the Carpenter Performing Arts Center, please visit us online at carpenterarts.org. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.